Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. My hands won't stop shaking as I type this. I've been awake for 32 hours straight, but I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, crawling out of the surf, water pouring from their gaping mouths, eyes fixed but unseeing. I need to write this down to make sense of what happened. Maybe someone out there has answers. It was supposed to be a normal shift at Ocean View Beach. I'd been working as a senior lifeguard there for 3 summers, and October meant smaller crowds, calmer waters. Perfect for catching up on my certification reading between occasional scans of the shoreline. The morning fog had just burned off, revealing one of those pristine California days that belong on postcards. Azure water stretching to the horizon, sunlight dancing across the surface like scattered diamonds. My tower gave me a 180-degree view of my section. To my left, rocky outcroppings created natural boundaries. To my right, the beach extended another half-mile before curving out of sight. Maybe 40 people were scattered across the sand, mostly locals who knew better than to swim in the October chill. A few kids built sandcastles near the water's edge while their parents scrolled through phones. I remember checking my watch, 11:17 a.m. The time matters because it marks the moment before everything changed, before the world broke. I was scanning the water when I spotted it, a dark shape drifting about 30 yards out, bobbing with the gentle swells. At first, I thought it was a seal, or maybe a cluster of seaweed. But something about the way it moved, or didn't move, set off alarms in my head. I grabbed my binoculars, focusing on the shape. The moment the image clarified, my stomach dropped. It was a body, face down, arms splayed out. Training kicked in. I hit the emergency button on my radio, grabbed my rescue board, and ran. The sand burned beneath my feet as I sprinted toward the water. "Clear the water! Everyone out!" I shouted, blowing my whistle in 3 sharp blasts. The cold Pacific hit me like a wall, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I paddled hard, driving through the small breakers until I reached the body. It was a man, maybe in his 40s, wearing what looked like torn fishing clothes. As I maneuvered him onto my board, I noticed the first warning sign. His skin was unnaturally cold and bloated, suggesting he'd been in the water for hours, possibly days. But it was the wounds that made me pause. His back was covered in what looked like bite marks. Not shark bites, I've seen those before. These were smaller, more numerous, almost human-sized. Some were deep enough to expose bone. No time to process. I secured him and paddled back to shore where a small crowd had gathered. 2 off-duty nurses who'd been sunbathing rushed over to help. I flipped him over, revealing a face frozen in terror, eyes clouded and white. "How long has he been under?" one nurse asked, already positioning for CPR. "I don't know," I said, but looking at him. I never finished that sentence because someone screamed. Looking up, I spotted another body in the surf, then another. Dark shapes appearing in the water as if the ocean was suddenly offering up its dead. "Get those people away from the water!" I shouted to my colleague Greg in the next tower over. He was already on his radio, calling for backup and ambulances. I ran back into the surf, Greg joining me. Together, we pulled 4 more bodies onto the beach. Each one had similar wounds, bite marks, missing chunks of flesh, defensive wounds on hands and arms. We laid them in a row on the sand like some macabre lineup. By then, patrol cars had arrived, officers pushing back the horrified crowd. "What the hell happened out there?" an officer named Tanner asked, looking at the bodies. "Boat accident?" I shook my head. "These wounds, they're bites. Human bites." Tanner's face paled. "All of them?" Before I could answer, a paramedic's shout drew our attention. The first body, the one I'd pulled from the water, was moving. Not the gentle movement of revived muscles, but violent spasms. His back arched impossibly high, bones cracking audibly. The paramedic who'd been about to intubate him jumped back. Then the body sat up. I've replayed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. The way his head rotated, neck cracking, milky eyes sweeping the beach until they locked onto the closest person. The female nurse who'd been preparing to help. His jaw opened wider than humanly possible, revealing blackened gums and yellow teeth. The sound he made, a guttural, hungry growl that still haunts me. He lunged forward with speed that defied his waterlogged state. The nurse screamed as his teeth sank into her forearm. Blood sprayed across the sand. 2 officers rushed forward, pulling the attacker off her. It took 3 of them to restrain him. He kept snapping his jaws, head whipping side to side, trying to bite anything within reach. "Get him restrained. Get a sedative," someone shouted. But it was already too late. The other bodies were moving too. Rising up one by one, making those same terrible sounds. Hungry sounds. Panic exploded across the beach. People ran in all directions, some toward the parking lot, others, God help them, into the water, thinking the danger was only on land. I spotted a family, mother, father, 2 small children, frozen in terror as one of the bodies shambled toward them. I ran, tackling it from behind. We hit the sand hard. Its skin felt wrong under my hands, cold and rubbery like handling raw chicken. It twisted beneath me with inhuman flexibility, jaws snapping inches from my face. I could smell its breath, like rotten meat and seawater. I managed to shove it away and scramble to my feet. "Run!" I yelled to the family. "Get to the parking lot." Looking back toward the water, I saw the true horror unfolding. More shapes emerging from the waves. Dozens now, all moving with that same broken, determined gait. All with the same ravaged bodies and empty, hungry eyes. People were screaming, running in all directions. The narrow access roads quickly jammed with cars. Those still on the beach were trapped between the advancing horde from the water and the panicked crowd blocking escape routes. Greg appeared at my side, breathing hard. "What the hell are these things?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But they spread it through bites. Look." I pointed to the nurse who'd been bitten. She was convulsing on the ground, her skin already taking on that same gray pallor. The paramedic who'd been treating her now backed away, hands raised. "We need weapons," Greg said. We raided the emergency shed. There wasn't much. A fire axe, some pipe from the plumbing repairs, flare guns. I took the axe, Greg the pipe. Better than nothing. The next hour was madness. We moved across the beach, trying to create safe corridors for people to escape. The infected, that's what I was calling them in my head, were slow on sand, their waterlogged bodies struggling to maintain balance. But they were relentless, and their numbers kept growing as more dragged themselves from the surf. I found myself guiding a group of terrified teenagers around a cluster of infected. One girl was hyperventilating, barely able to walk. I half-carried her, whispering reassurances I didn't believe. We were almost to the parking lot when one of the infected cut us off. A woman in what had once been an expensive wetsuit, now torn and bloody. One arm ended in a jagged stump, bone protruding like a spike. She lurched toward us, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I pushed the teenagers back, stepped forward, and swung the axe. The blade connected with her shoulder, lodging in the collarbone with a sickening crack. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the wound at all. Just kept coming, the axe now protruding from her body like some grotesque appendage. I backed away, weaponless now. The teenagers scattered, screaming. The infected woman fixed her clouded eyes on me. I braced myself, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. That's when Officer Tanner appeared, shouting for me to get down. I dropped as his service pistol fired 3 rapid shots. The infected woman's head exploded in a spray of dark fluid, her body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. "Headshots," he said grimly, helping me up. "Nothing else stops them." We looked out across the beach, now a scene from a nightmare. Bodies, both the still-moving infected and the motionless truly dead, littered the sand. The water continued to offer up more of them, an endless procession of horror. Emergency vehicles clogged the narrow access road, lights flashing uselessly. "They're calling it in all up and down the coast," Tanner said. Voice hollow. "It's not just here. Santa Monica, Venice, Newport, all reporting the same thing, bodies washing ashore, attacking people. I thought of the bites, how quickly the infection spread. We need to quarantine anyone who's been bitten. Tanner nodded. They're setting up a triage point at the community center, trying to separate the bitten from the rest. A scream drew our attention back to the water. A teenage boy had fallen while fleeing. Now 3 infected closed in on him, moving with that broken, determined gait that still fills my nightmares. I started running before I could think, Tanner right behind me. We were too late. The first infected fell upon the boy, teeth tearing into his calf. His scream cut through the chaos like a knife. Tanner fired, taking down 2 of the infected with precise headshots. I grabbed the fallen axe and brought it down on the third, the blade cleaving through its skull. But the damage was done. The boy lay on the sand, clutching his mangled leg, eyes wide with shock and the terrible knowledge of what was to come. "I'm sorry," I whispered, helping him up. "We need to get you to the triage center." As we made our way across the beach, I saw Greg directing a group of survivors toward the community center. Our eyes met briefly. His face was splattered with dark fluid, his pipe dented and bloody. The community center was chaos. Medics had set up makeshift barriers, separating the bitten from the uninjured. Armed officers stood guard, faces grim behind surgical masks. They took the boy from me, leading him to the quarantine area where others sat in various stages of the transformation, some still lucid and terrified, others already convulsing as the infection took hold. A harried doctor pulled me aside. "You're a lifeguard. What did you see out there? How did it start?" I told him everything. The bodies washing ashore, the bites, how quickly the infected turned. He listened intently, then showed me a preliminary report on his tablet. Similar incidents were being reported not just in California, but all along the Pacific coast, from Mexico to Canada. Thousands of infected, all emerging from the ocean. "Any theories?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing concrete. Some are saying it's a pathogen that's been dormant in deep ocean waters, brought up by recent seismic activity. Others think it might be biological warfare. Right now, all we know is it spreads through fluid contact, bites being the most efficient vector, and the transformation takes less than 30 minutes. A commotion at the entrance interrupted us. More survivors poured in. Many injured. I spotted Greg helping an elderly couple through the door. "I need to get back out there," I said. "There are still people on the beach." The doctor grabbed my arm. "Be careful, and remember, once they're bitten, there's nothing you can do for them. Don't risk yourself for the doomed." Harsh words, but I'd already seen the truth of them firsthand. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the beach. The infected still emerged from the waves, but slower now, as if the ocean's supply of horror was finally diminishing. The beach itself was a war zone, blood-stained sand, abandoned belongings, bodies that moved and bodies that didn't. I found Greg organizing a small group of volunteers, other lifeguards, a few police officers, even some civilians who'd found courage in the chaos. They had weapons now, proper ones. Someone had broken into the sporting goods store in town. "We're going back down," Greg said when he saw me. "Sweep the beach one more time before dark. Anyone still hiding in the bathhouses or under the pier." I took a shotgun someone offered, checked that it was loaded. The weight of it felt wrong in my hands. I'd saved countless people from drowning, but I'd never had to kill to save someone before. Now it seemed that's exactly what was required. As we made our way back to the beach, I looked out at the darkening water, at the infected still dragging themselves from the surf, and wondered, what was waiting out there, beneath the waves? How many more would the tide bring in? The ocean had always been my sanctuary. Now it had become a gateway for the dead to return. As dusk settled over the devastated beach, our small rescue party moved cautiously across the blood-soaked sand. The western horizon blazed crimson, as if the sun itself was bleeding into the ocean. 6 of us remained: Greg, 2 other lifeguards named Ray and Kevin, Officer Tanner, and a local surfer named Wyatt who'd proven himself handy with a baseball bat. We moved in formation, watching for movement among the scattered beach shelters and overturned chairs. "Last sweep before full dark," Greg reminded us. "Check every hiding spot. Anyone living gets escorted to the community center. Anyone not living gets put down." My shotgun felt heavier with each step. I'd already used it twice, once on an infected that lunged at me from beneath a collapsed tent, and once to save Kevin when he was almost overwhelmed near the public showers. The sound of the blast still rang in my ears, along with the sickening splash of what had once been a human head hitting the sand. We approached the pier, its wooden structure casting long shadows across the beach. A tense silence had fallen over the area. The screams had mostly stopped, replaced by the persistent moan of the infected and the distant wail of sirens from the town. That's when I noticed something on the horizon, a dark shape larger than the infected bodies that had been washing in all day. Much larger. "Guys," I said, pointing out to sea. "You see that?" We all squinted into the fading light. The shape resolved itself into the unmistakable silhouette of a cruise ship. Even from this distance, I could see something was terribly wrong. Smoke poured from its upper decks, and the navigation lights flickered erratically. The vessel was moving too fast, on a direct course toward shore. "Jesus Christ," Tanner breathed. "It's going to hit." I raised my binoculars, focusing on the approaching ship. What I saw turned my blood to ice. The decks were crawling with figures, hundreds of them, all moving with that same broken, lurching gait I'd come to recognize. As I watched, several tumbled over the railings, plummeting into the water below. The bridge appeared to be on fire, flames licking at the windows. "Those bodies in the water," Greg said, his voice hollow. "They're coming from that ship." No one spoke for a long moment. The implication was clear. If dozens of infected had already reached shore from the drifting vessel, what would happen when the entire ship's complement arrived? "We need to warn the evacuation center," Tanner said, already reaching for his radio. "Tell them to—" He never finished the sentence. The radio crackled with panicked voices, then went silent. In the distance, toward town, we heard a fresh wave of screams. "They've reached the center," Kevin said, his young face pale with shock. "The infected from earlier, they've broken through." We stood frozen, watching the blazing ship bear down on the coast, knowing what its arrival would mean. A second wave, far larger than what we'd already faced. There would be no stopping it. The cruise liner's horn blasted, a long, mournful sound that seemed to announce the death of everything we knew. It was moving at full speed, smoke billowing from its stacks. I could see now that it would miss the immediate beachfront, instead plowing into the marina area about a half-mile north of us, where the expensive beachfront properties began. "We can't stay here," I said, gripping my shotgun tighter. "We need to move inland, find somewhere defensible." The beach had become a killing ground, but the town behind us now blazed with car fires and echoed with screams. We were caught between two fronts of the same nightmare. Greg nodded grimly. "The Lifeguard station has reinforced doors, supplies. It's our best bet." The central Lifeguard station was about a quarter-mile south, a two-story structure with communication equipment and emergency provisions. If anywhere on this beach offered shelter, it would be there. We set off at a brisk pace, hugging the waterline where the sand was firmer, allowing faster movement. Behind us, the burning ship grew larger, its approach inexorable. I estimated we had minutes, maybe less, before impact. We were halfway to the station when the world seemed to tear itself apart. The cruise ship, a massive floating city of metal and glass, slammed into the marina at full speed. The sound was apocalyptic, screeching metal, shattering glass, the deep groan of the earth itself as thousands of tons of steel drove into it. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground beneath our feet, knocking several of us down. I watched in horrified awe as the ship's momentum carried it forward, tearing through the marina's structures and into the first row of beachfront homes. It finally came to rest at a grotesque angle, its bow embedded in what had once been multi-million-dollar real estate, its stern still floating in the shallow water. The hull had split along its port side, creating a gaping wound in the vessel's pristine white exterior. For one surreal moment, silence descended. Then came the screams, not from the ship but from the town. The impact had collapsed structures, crushed vehicles, ruptured gas lines. Fires erupted along the impact zone, illuminating the scene in flickering orange light. And then they came. The decks of the massive vessel disgorged their horror all at once. From my vantage point on the beach, I could see directly into the ruptured side of the ship, where interior staterooms and corridors were now exposed like a grotesque dollhouse. Hundreds of figures began pouring out, through doorways, over broken railings, climbing down the tilted hull, some simply falling from the upper decks. They moved like a living avalanche, a cascade of broken bodies tumbling down the ship's surface. Some snapped limbs as they fell, bones protruding from gray flesh, yet they continued moving with single-minded purpose. Others landed with sickening crunches on the concrete below, only to rise again seconds later. Necks and backs bent at impossible angles. The once white hull of the ship was streaked with crimson handprints and dark fluid, creating a macabre canvas against which the silhouettes of the falling infected stood in stark relief against the flames behind them. They dropped into the shallow water by the dozens, then hundreds, passengers in vacation attire, crew members in uniform fragments, all reduced to the same shambling horror. Where they landed in deeper water, they didn't drown. Instead, they simply walked along the bottom, emerging like primordial creatures from the surf. Others formed grotesque chains, clutching at each other as they moved toward land, using their collective mass to ford the water between ship and shore. Most terrifying was their silence. Despite their violent descent from the ship, despite broken bones and twisted limbs, they made no sounds of pain, only the constant hungry moaning that seemed to rise in volume as more joined their ranks on the sand. The infected from the ship hit the shore in a wave more terrible than any tide, a dark mass flowing across the beach like spilled oil. They moved with a horrible synchronicity, as though guided by a single hive mind focused solely on consuming anything still living. Their collective moan filled the air, drowning out even the crackle of the spreading fires. "Run!" Greg shouted, and we did. We sprinted for the Lifeguard station, no longer caring about stealth or methodical sweeps. The infected surged across the beach behind us, their numbers beyond comprehension. Where minutes before there had been dozens scattered across the sand, now there were hundreds, perhaps thousands, a flood of grasping hands and snapping teeth that swallowed everything in its path. Some wore tattered evening wear, suggesting they'd been enjoying the ship's fine dining when the infection hit. Others were in swimsuits, their formerly tanned skin now a sickly gray. Crew members in shredded uniforms moved alongside passengers, all distinction erased by the hunger that drove them. The station appeared ahead, its familiar silhouette a beacon of possible safety. I risked a glance back. The infected had formed a wall of bodies that stretched the width of the beach, advancing with the implacable certainty of the tide itself. At their current speed, they would reach us just as we arrived at the station. It would be close. We reached the station's rear entrance, Tanner immediately working on the security lock with shaking hands. The rest of us formed a perimeter, weapons ready. The first of the infected were less than 50 yards away now. "Hurry," Kevin urged, his voice cracking. The lock finally gave. We piled inside, Wyatt and I shoving a heavy storage cabinet against the door as soon as everyone was through. The reinforced windows offered view of the beach, and the horror approaching from all sides. The station's second floor housed the communication center. Greg rushed upstairs to try the radio, while the rest of us secured the ground floor. I found emergency supplies, water, protein bars, first aid kits, and distributed them. No one had the stomach to eat, but we all drank thirstily. Kevin's arm was bleeding from a fall during our run. Tanner helped bandage it, hands gentle despite his military bearing. Greg returned, shaking his head. "Radio's dead, power's out across the grid." We gathered by the front windows, watching as infected surrounded the building. Some beat mindlessly at the walls, others simply pressed against the structure, drawn by the knowledge of living flesh inside. Their faces were fixed in expressions of mindless hunger, jaws working reflexively. Night had fallen completely now. The only light came from the burning ship and buildings along the shore, casting everything in a hellish glow. The cruise liner had become a macabre beacon, drawing more infected toward it, and consequently, toward us. "Think they can break in?" Wyatt asked, gripping his bat. "Not through these doors," Tanner replied, "but we can't stay here forever." He was right. We had water for maybe 2 days, food for less, no communication with the outside world, no way to know if help was coming, or if there was anywhere left that could send help. I moved to a side window, trying to gauge our options. The street behind the station was choked with abandoned vehicles and wandering infected. The beach before us was worse. Hundreds, maybe thousands of figures now roamed the sand, all converged from the shipwreck. Our little island of safety was surrounded by a sea of death. We settled in for a long night, taking shifts to watch the perimeter. I volunteered for the first watch, positioning myself at the front window with my shotgun across my lap. The others tried to rest, though I doubt any found sleep. As I gazed out at the ruined beach, my beach, the one I'd sworn to protect, I felt a profound sense of loss. Just hours ago, this had been a place of joy, of life. Children building sandcastles, couples walking hand in hand, surfers riding waves. Now it was a graveyard where the dead refused to rest. The hours crawled by. Around 2 a.m., something changed. The infected seemed to grow more agitated, more focused in their efforts to reach us. They began to concentrate around the eastern side of the building, their moans rising in volume. "Something's wrong," I whispered, waking the others. "They're organizing." We gathered at the east windows, watching in confusion as the infected seemed to flow toward something beyond our view. "There must be survivors out there," Greg said. "They're drawn to them." A terrible scream confirmed his theory. Human, terrified, close. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, bobbing frantically as someone ran between the abandoned cars on the street. "2 people," Tanner said, using his police-issued binoculars. "A man and a woman. They're trying to reach us." The pair weaved through obstacles. The man holding the flashlight, the woman clutching what looked like a child's backpack. Behind them surged a mass of infected, drawn by their movement and noise. "We have to help them," Kevin said, already moving toward the door. "Wait," Tanner cautioned. "If we open that door, we compromise our position. We could all die." "So we just watch them die instead?" Kevin's young face twisted in anguish. I made the decision before I fully processed it. "We help. Greg, Wyatt, cover us from the windows. Tanner, Kevin, we'll make a corridor, get them inside." We positioned ourselves at the eastern door, weapons ready. The plan was simple. Open the door, provide covering fire, bring the survivors in. Quick and clean. Nothing in this nightmare had been quick or clean. I counted down, then threw the door open. The night air hit me like a physical force, carrying the stench of death and smoke. Tanner and Kevin immediately began firing at the closest infected, creating a narrow path for the running pair. "Here," I shouted, waving my flashlight. "This way." The survivors spotted us, changing course. They were maybe 30 yards away, the infected closing in from behind. For a moment, I thought they'd make it. Then the woman stumbled. The man turned back for her, reaching out. An infected tackled him from behind, teeth sinking into his shoulder. His scream pierced the night as he fell, disappearing beneath a wave of clawing hands and snapping jaws. The woman regained her feet, continuing toward us, but it was too late. They swarmed her, dragging her down just yards from our door. Her final scream will haunt me forever. "Close it!" Tanner yelled, firing his last rounds into the approaching horde. "Close it now!" We slammed the door shut, throwing the bolts just as the first infected reached it. The metal vibrated with their impacts, but held firm. We stood there, breathing hard, the failure weighing on us like physical pain. "We tried," Tanner said quietly. "That's all we can do now. Try." Dawn approached, though the sky remained dark with smoke from the burning buildings. The station's windows revealed a transformed world. The beach was no longer visible beneath the carpet of roaming infected. The cruise ship still burned, its hull now listing further as the tide receded. Beyond it, much of the beachfront property was in flames. Our situation grew more desperate by the hour. The infected continued their relentless assault on our shelter, and small breaches had begun to appear. A window cracked from sustained pressure. A door frame splintered. We reinforced them as best we could, but it was clear the station wasn't designed to withstand this kind of siege. Around mid-morning, disaster struck. A massive explosion rocked the northern end of the beach. One of the fuel tanks at the marina had blown, sending shrapnel and burning debris in all directions. The shockwave hit our station like a giant's fist, shattering 2 windows simultaneously. The infected poured in before we could react. What followed was chaos. Gunshots, screams, the wet sounds of teeth tearing flesh. I found myself backed into a corner, firing my last shells into the surging mass. Wyatt went down first, overwhelmed while trying to barricade the broken window. Greg and Tanner stood back to back, fighting with everything they had. Kevin had disappeared in the initial surge. I was out of ammunition, swinging my empty shotgun like a club. An infected, a woman in the tattered remains of a cruise staff uniform, lunged at me. I felt her teeth graze my arm as I twisted away, then brought the shotgun butt down on her skull. There were too many. Greg screamed something at me, pointing toward the back of the station. I couldn't hear him over the moans and struggle, but his meaning was clear. Run, find another way. I saw a path, narrow, treacherous but possible, toward the rear emergency exit. The infected were focused on Greg and Tanner, drawn by their desperate struggle. If I moved now, I might make it. Every instinct screamed at me to stay, to fight alongside my friends until the end. But some deeper drive, the animal need to survive, propelled me forward. I ducked beneath grasping hands, slid over a counter, and crashed through the back door into blinding daylight. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The sounds from within the station told me everything I needed to know. The beach behind the station was slightly less crowded with infected. Most had concentrated around the front where the action was. I sprinted across the sand, my lungs burning, legs pumping with desperate energy. I had no plan beyond movement, beyond putting distance between myself and death. The storm drain appeared before me, a large concrete tunnel opening onto the beach, designed to channel rainwater from the streets to the ocean. During the dry season, it stood empty, a dark mouth leading away from the horror behind me. I didn't hesitate. I plunged into the darkness, the sounds of pursuit fading as I ventured deeper into the concrete passage. The tunnel smelled of salt, mildew, and waste. Nothing moved within except scurrying rats, equally frightened of what transpired above. I followed the tunnel's gentle slope upward, away from the beach. Water dripped from the ceiling, splattering on my shoulders. My hand, trembling, found my phone in my pocket. The screen illuminated, revealing gray concrete stretching ahead into darkness. The battery showed 17%. Not much, but enough to guide me. After what felt like hours of stumbling through branching passages, I found myself in a larger chamber where several drainage pipes converged. Graffiti covered the walls, beer cans and needles littered the floor, evidence of human presence, though long abandoned. I collapsed against a wall, my adrenaline finally depleting, leaving me hollow and shaking. In the dim light of my dying phone, I took stock. No weapons, no food, no water beyond the filthy puddles at my feet. My uniform was torn and blood-spattered, though none of it seemed to be mine. By some miracle, I hadn't been bitten or scratched. I was alive. Everyone else, Greg, Tanner, Kevin, Wyatt, the countless beachgoers I'd tried to save, they were gone, or worse than gone. As the reality of my situation settled over me, a bitter laugh escaped my cracked lips, echoing strangely in the concrete chamber. The irony was too much. I'd spent years training to save people from drowning, from the ocean's dangers. Now the ocean itself had turned against us, delivering death to our shores in the form of those shambling bodies and that burning ship. The water had always been my element, my passion, the clean, the blue Pacific with its rhythmic waves and salt-tinged breeze. Now I huddled in filthy drainage water, surrounded by the stench of sewage and decay, hiding from what the ocean had become. I curled into myself, listening to the distant sounds of collapse above. Buildings falling, explosions as gas lines ruptured. The occasional burst of gunfire quickly silenced. The world was ending up there, while I cowered in the dark below. My phone battery dwindled to 5%, then 3%. I knew I should conserve it, but I couldn't bear the thought of total darkness. Not yet. In its fading light, I stared at the murky water pooled around my feet, rippling with each distant impact from above. This was my world now. Not the sunlit towers watching over laughing swimmers, not the clean expanse of sand and surf. Just darkness, filth, and the knowledge that everything I'd known was gone. The beach I'd loved, the ocean I'd respected, both transformed into deliverers of the dead. I don't know how long I can stay here. The hunger is already gnawing at me, and thirst will follow soon. Eventually, I'll have to venture back up, to face whatever the world has become. But for now, I sit in this concrete tomb, wondering how many others are hiding in their own dark places. Wondering if there's anything left of the world I knew. Wondering if the ocean is still disgorging its dead onto the shores of every coastal city. An unstoppable tide of horror. My phone screen dims, then goes black. The darkness is absolute now. I close my eyes, though it makes no difference. In my mind, I can still see the beach as it was yesterday morning, perfect, peaceful, alive, before the ocean gave back its dead. The water around my feet rises slightly, bringing with it the tang of salt beneath the fetid waste smell. The tide is coming in, pushing up through the drainage system. Even here, the ocean finds me. Even here, I can't escape what it's become. I pull my knees to my chest, making myself smaller in the darkness and wait for whatever comes next.